What is up, guys? Okay, so I want to go through with some changes here that we've gotten to see regarding the expansion coming out, and specifically for survival hunters. I know there's not a ton of people out there playing survival, but there's a lot of cool changes, and hopefully this kind of appeals to the broader group of people playing hunter in general, as there are a lot of ranged abilities that are changing. Now, I first want to touch on just a couple things as far as how survival currently plays in Legion. So, you know, basically Legion comes out, survival gets introduced as a melee spec, and most hunters totally hate it because people aren't playing hunter because it's melee, but a handful of people really like it. It actually can pull a pretty decent DPS, however has a very clunky feel because Mongoose Bite having like 3 stacks and randomly being able to generate stacks sometimes quicker than others, no focus cost, and a bunch of other abilities costing focus, has this kind of really weird clunky feel to it. I personally really enjoy the spec, and I really like kind of the skill cap and like high focus that the spec requires to play. You're not just spamming 2 or 3 buttons. You're really kind of having to like balance a lot of things. But I do think and agree with a lot of people that say it feels very counterintuitive and weird. They could accomplish a similar playstyle and have it feel a little more fluid than it does. And I think Blizzard also agrees and is able to assess that as well based on these changes. So that being said, currently I would say priorities as far as the content I enjoy is PvP, then Mythic Plus, then Raids. I do all of them currently as survival, but I definitely like the PvP content as survival more than the others. So that's kind of the angle I'm coming from, just so you kind of know the perspective I'm taking on this. As far as like long, sustained, single target fights and raid type fights, don't really care too much about that as far as the certain builds and stuff I'm going to be talking about, but just kind of wanted to give that disclosure. So a couple things, let's get into these new the new talents and abilities here. Now, I'll post this link in the description for you guys to take a look at. You can take a look at every spec here via all these buttons up here at the top. But there's a couple points I really want to point out. As you can see here, Mongoose Bite is not baseline, it is a talent. We'll definitely talk about that a little bit more later. And Kill Command is now baseline as an ability in lieu of Flanking Strike. You can see here, obviously you can talent into Flanking Strike, but Kill Command is the baseline ability in that spot. A couple other things that are worth talking about is Wildfire Bomb is a baseline ability that's going to have 1 charge. It's going to have no resource cost, and is basically your Dragon's Fire Grenade as it is currently. However, Dragon's Fire Grenade has a slow on it, which is negligible and kind of a stupid component of the ability anyway, and Wildfire Bomb does not have that. But basically think of this as just your Dragon's Fire Grenade, and it's a baseline ability you don't have to talent for. Another thing worth pointing out, we have Serpent Sting, as it's shown here, 40-yard range, very low focus cost, and a 12-second damage over time with a slight little, hit of damage that's going to be applied on the initial cast itself. What else? All this is pretty much the same. The same. Aspect of the Eagle. So this is reading as the current tooltip. I don't know if this is still going to be the 10% crit, if that's going to still be in here or not. I do know that they're changing it, at least in these patch notes over here, and I don't know where it is, but I'll just tell you what it is. That they're making that while Aspect of the Eagle is active, you gain a 35-yard range on your Raptor Strike. If you're spec'd for Mongoose Bite, I'm sure it will affect Mongoose Bite in lieu of Raptor Strike. But you basically have a 35-yard range during the duration. The other thing is they've extended the duration, at least initially in these ability change notes, to 20 seconds instead of what currently is now 10. Doesn't say anything in here about the damage buff that we currently have with our artifact traits, so we don't know if that's going to be a part of it or not, but we'll have to see. The other thing is that Disengage is baseline for survival, and we have a unique passive for survival hunters only where the cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds. what is the base cooldown is a 30-second recharge. It's not that high currently. I don't actually know off the top of my head. I want to say it's 15 seconds currently, but I could be wrong. But anyway, so that's going to be a big deal. Basically a 30%, 33% reduced cooldown on disengage compared to other hunters. So exactly how that plays into our playstyle is going to be unique and interesting to kind of see, because we do have a lot of ranged abilities. So I do see us having potential setups as far as talents and playstyles go to really maximize range and being at range in a lot of situations. But we'll kind of get into that a little more here in a second. So let's get into these talents. I went through those. Those are all the abilities you really need to know as far as referencing any of these talents. One thing to mention is I do believe Waylay is still going to be, it's not listed on here. It is mentioned in here, and I do believe it is still going to exist. I would be really disappointed if they took Waylay out, because I actually really like Waylay. And if you're not familiar with it, that's just where your traps have additional effect if they've been active for a couple seconds or like a second and a half. And I really do like that because it allows for a lot of unique kind of setups and use of these abilities, because your traps, like having these additional effects if they're sitting there not activated for a couple seconds. Anyway, I digress. But anyway, I hope they don't take it out. I don't think they are. It is mentioned in these, just not shown on this list. So I'm anticipating it is still going to be there. What does this do? Oh, cool. All. I should have done that as a way easier list spec. Interesting. Anyway, I'm not super familiar with all this. The other thing I should have mentioned is your mastery has changed, which I'm really excited about because our current mastery is terrible. But basically, you're going to generate a small portion of health every 5 seconds, kind of like a spirit bond type scenario. And then you and your pet's focus spending abilities are going to have increased damage. So I think mastery is going to be very good. Focus spending abilities currently, from what I can tell, is basically Serpent Sting and Raptor Strike and or Mongoose Bite. I might be wrong on that. There's, Murder of Crows obviously is still a focus spending ability. So I would anticipate that that's going to be affected. And Arctic Bola is also. So we'll see that could really kind of play into some cool situations. Maybe we do stack mastery. I don't know if that's going to also increase the health percent we are going to regen, but that could also be pretty cool and basically have like a bunch of different. Anyway, let's get into the talents. So Guerrilla Tactics, the same name, completely different talent. It is going to give our Wildfire Bomb or our Dragon's Fire Grenade 2 charges, so 1 additional charge. Again, this does have a 40-yard range and has an 8-yard pulsating AoE around it for 6 seconds while the damage over time effect is active. So we'll see exactly how crucial or how key Wildfire Bomb is to our rotation. The only reason I could see this being something you would go is that there's a chance that having 2 stacks of this allows you to kind of have a more fluid rotation and higher uptime on this if this is a very high portion of our overall damage output. But we'll have to obviously see more on all of this once it comes live. Flanking Strike is basically going to act exactly how Flanking Strike currently does. One thing that I want to mention on this is that you can see here it's going to gain or generate an additional 10 focus. So if we go to Kill Command here, currently Flanking Strike costs and is our main focus spending ability. Kill Command or Flanking Strike, whichever you go, is going to generate focus. So Kill Command is going to be 20 focus, Flanking Strike is going to be 30 focus. Let's get on to Throwing Axes here. Same exact kind of situation that it currently is. However, it is going to generate 30 focus as a 40 yards ranged ability. Okay, so let's think about that for a second. You could run Throwing Axes and you have Kill Command. You can be at a 40-yard range and you have 2 ranged abilities that are going to be able to generate a ton of focus. Okay, I mean that's a lot. Like if I would expect this to be like a 15 focus generation ability. Maybe they're going to nerf that. But anyway, it's important to kind of know that there's a playstyle that's kind of being shown through all of these, that we have kind of these ranged abilities, and maybe survival is a melee spec, but you have 80% of all your abilities and things that you need to try and maintain throughout fights that are ranged and don't have a melee requirement to them. So there could be some pretty cool implications to that of being this kind of hybrid class that currently doesn't really exist. And I do also want to touch on, while we're here at this top tree, is that if you really like exactly how the current playstyle is of survival, and it's very melee heavy type situation, it looks like you're going to basically be able to spec exactly how you would now, and you basically can imitate the identical playstyle and feel of the current spec. So don't be worried like, oh, they're making all these changes and adding some ranged abilities, and like, I'm not going to be able to enjoy that melee spec. You literally could go flanking strike, butchery, murder of crows, camouflage, mongoose bite, and whatever, birds of prey. I mean, like, you literally can run exactly the same situation, and it'll feel identical almost to exactly how it's now, except with a little bit of a more fluid playstyle because of some of these quality of life changes that we're getting. So don't worry about that. If you love the current spec, it will still be a potential option for you. Now let's get down here. Hydra's Bite. It's going to give you a flat damage increase on your Serpent Sting by 30%. And it's also going to fire 2 additional arrows. So you're going to basically be able to apply your sting to 3 targets when you cast this. Exactly the range of those additional enemies is not known. Is that within 5 yards? Is that within 20 yards? Like, you know, if depending on how broad that array of application is going to really have a big impact on the value of this. But obviously for single target, this is going to definitely be your go-to here, because I'm imagining we're going to want 100% uptime on Serpent Sting, and you're going to increase that by 30%. So that's a pretty kind of straightforward there. Now, Volatile Mixture is new, and this is basically Serpent Sting synergizing with your Wildfire Bomb. Now, basically, if you have Serpent Sting on the target, you throw your Wildfire Bomb, there's going to be this additional damage coming out, also an 8-yard radius. So it's going to synergize perfectly with this 8-yard radius. And you're going to, like I said, you're going to end up wanting 100% uptime on certain Serpent Sting, I'm sure. So basically, it's just going to amplify the AoE component of your Wildfire Bomb. So that could be pretty cool. It sounds like it's basically going to be very consistent AoE damage. So if you have very long, consistent AoE type fights or situations, maybe even in PvP for like flag spinning type maps or big team fight maps, Eye of the Storm, things like that, you know, this is going to be a good talent to go. My only concern with both of these is that 8 yards is very short. In my opinion, if it was like a 15-yard radius, would really add a lot of variety and make it a little bit more of a realistic option to go in more situations if you do really end up enjoying that play style. But 8 yards is going to be real tough to manage that, in my opinion. But we'll see. Maybe that's something that they tweak later on. Butchery is basically the same as it currently is, with a couple minor tweaks. You still have 3 charges of it. It still has a recharge. It is only an 8-yard range in this, and I feel like the current range is longer. I could be wrong on that, but I feel like the current range is pretty long, which is a huge thing that I really actually like about the ability. The other couple things is it's a 30-second recharge, and I believe it's like an 18-second or 12-second currently. So that's a pretty big hit. However, they're reducing the focus cost from 40 focus, I'm almost positive it's 40 focus, down to 20. This is a big deal though, because what basically they're giving us options here is this is a more single target, 2-3 target type option. This is a more consistent, compact, high pulsating AoE damage, and Butchery is basically going to be like an AoE burst type option. So all of these are accomplishing some kind of an AoE function, and they're all very different, which I really like, because I don't think necessarily one is going to highly outweigh the other as far as like 100% of the time you're going this, because I know currently Butchery's damage is amazing in certain situations, and not so good in others. Obviously, single target, you never use it. So it'll be really cool to see exactly how that plays out. I really like at least the idea of what they're going with so far on this. I think is going to give us a lot of really cool options and different play styles that will all be viable. Now down here to the 45 talent, this is all straightforward Trailblazer, same as it is now. I'm not going to go over it. Post haste, same as it is now. Since we do have disengage baseline, I believe this is going to affect both our harpoon and disengage. So this is going to have a very high value for us. I'm not sure. You can see up above it says survival harpoon, so maybe it's only going to affect our harpoon. So I'm not exactly sure yet, and we'll have to see once this gets a little closer exactly how this how it relates to specifically survival. Now, if we look here, your ability critical strikes have a 15% chance to reset the cooldown. Farstrider was in the game early on, and they took it out and put in, I think they put it in Disengage in its spot, or maybe it was Trailblazer. Anyway, it was initially in Legion, and it got taken out. They're putting it back in, and I actually do really like this because we are going to have basically Serpent Sting as an ability, Wildfire Bomb, Kill Command, a bunch of abilities that are from range that if those crit, they'll have a chance to reset. And since we have a lot more ranged abilities, if we're having issues in getting kited, having those abilities crit to then automatically refresh our Harpoon cooldown could end up kind of giving us some very interesting synergies in PvP specifically for kind of sticking on to targets. So I actually really like Farstrider in conjunction with all these other changes that I'm going to be talking about. Let's go down over here to Bloodseeker. Bloodseeker is going to basically be, and I can't remember that talent that's currently down the bottom right, but basically where if your pet is spec ferocity, your kill command or flanking strike has a bleed affected with it. That's basically what this is. Your kill command is going to basically cause a bleed, and passively in conjunction with that, every target that has a bleed on them and your pet is within 12 yards of those targets is going to gain 10% attack speed for every bleeding target within 12 yards. So I don't think you're going to have a bunch of bleeds on multiple targets. I could be wrong. Maybe there's going to be some way of actually spreading bleeds, but I believe most of our stuff is going to be either fire magic damage from this and Serpent Sting, and your only bleed really coming from Bloodseeker. So I think the passive is kind of negligible on this specific ability, but it is basically going to be our highest consistent damage talent in this row as far as just consistent DPS increase. Steel Trap is going to function how it is now. I'm not going to go through this. I'm not a big fan of Steel Trap currently. I don't ever run it, and I don't anticipate running it, assuming they keep it the same, because I enjoy having Freezing Trap for a lot of situations. And currently the rotation is hectic enough as is. Maybe I will feel differently based on all of these changes that they're making. But anyway, pretty straightforward. Murderer Crows, pretty straightforward. 1 minute cooldown. It costs 30 focus. Currently in PvP, at least for survival, the damage on this is really nerfed. So I don't run it, and it doesn't really make any sense to at this point. So maybe they'll change that and tweak that. And again, with our new mastery, maybe this is a more viable option. We'll have to find out and see. But I definitely am in between Murder Crows and Bloodseeker currently in this row. Down to 75, a couple exciting changes here. We have Binding Shot now, which we didn't before. There is a change to Binding Shot in general between all the specs, where it is now a snare for 5 seconds rather than, I believe it's a 2-second stun currently. I actually do like this change because the stun component was problematic with a lot of arena comp synergies because you would be sharing DR. However, you're not going to have that problem anymore, and it looks like it's going to be a longer duration snare than it is a stun, which for, marksman and for BM, the purpose was basically as like a, creating distance, and you're basically still going to be able to accomplish that. The stun component wasn't, in my opinion, as valuable as like put something on the ground so they can't keep chasing you while you can create that gap, and you're still going to be able to accomplish that. So I do like having this in it. Wyvern Sting. I'm amazed that this wasn't part of our kit initially on the release in Legion. But one downside to this, based on looking at it, is it's a 1.5 second cast. I'm not thrilled about that as being a melee spec, but we are able to cast it while we're moving based on the tooltip here. So we'll see exactly. I'm excited though that no matter how this is implemented exactly, that it is part of our spec, because I feel like initially, way back in the day, Burning Crusade, stuff like that, Wyvern Sting was like what made survival. So I'm glad that they're kind of going back to the roots on that, and we have that as an option. Camouflage, same function as it is now. One thing worth mentioning on this though is that Marksman does not have camouflage any longer. So camouflage is specific to survival only. So that's kind of cool, and I actually do like that change. I don't think the other specs should be able to have camouflage, just from like a playstyle and the ideology of what the spec is, but so that's kind of cool. Let's get down here. These last couple rows are the exciting ones. Tip of the Spear. Kill command is going to increase the damage of your next Raptor Strike by 15%, and it's going to stack up to 3 times. Now this, at least at surface level, seems like it's going to be your highest damage increase for consistent long duration fights or long duration situations, just a higher increased damage uptime overall. My only concern, I guess, or like question on this is that getting 3 kill commands is basically over 18 seconds, right? There is a chance that you can see on that tooltip there that kill command can reset based on the cast. However, let's assume that doesn't proc and you have an unlucky series of 3 kill commands. It takes 18 seconds. Do you have other focus spending abilities that you're not going to cast in those, the remaining 15 seconds of that 18 seconds that you're not casting kill command? So basically the question is, are you basically going to only have 1 stack of this up every time you use Raptor Strike, or exactly how that's going to work? We won't know until the spec is actually out and playable. But I do like the idea of this. If you have other abilities you're able to spend focus on and basically store up this kind of like burst every 20 seconds or so, I think that's going to be a kind of a cool situation to run. Mongoose Bite is going to function basically exactly how it is now, with a couple really major changes to it though. It has no recharge time, it doesn't hold 3 stacks, and it does cost focus. So I think that is going to resolve the clunkiness that initially was in the spec as far as currently in Legion, and the stacks and randomly generating stacks and trying to synergize that with abilities that cost focus. That whole relation between all of that is going to be completely simplified, in the sense that it's going to cost focus, and basically however quickly you're able to regenerate focus during these 14-second windows is how many Mongoose Bites you're going to be able to get out, therefore maximizing that DPS. The other thing worth noting is Mongoose Fury looks like it's only stacking up 5 times rather than 6, how it is currently, which I also like that change, because having to get 6 global cooldowns off before you even get to like a really high damage window, I thought was a little excessive. But 5 global cooldowns to get to that is still pretty high, especially with the focus cost. So as you can see, 5 global cooldowns at 30 focus is 150 focus. So that's not going to give you a huge amount of time, but I think we are going to have a higher uptime at that 6 stack, 5 stack window. It's just going to be hard, and I don't foresee this being the talent go-to for PvP situations. Because currently the biggest problem, in my opinion, with Mongoose Bite is having windows of time where you can get 6 global cooldowns and stay in melee range of a target is pretty difficult, and the setup is just very hard to pull off. I mean, you obviously can, it's not reliable and it's not consistent. So for that reason, I don't think this is going to be a PvP choice, but I do see this as being a very good option for PvE type situations. Arctic Bola. Now currently this says 100-yard range. I don't think that that's right. I think it's going to get switched down to 40, but we can see it costs 40 focus, has a very high percentage damage compared to the other abilities that we've gone through. It has a 30% slow on it, 4 or 5 seconds, and it says right now it's a 9-second cooldown. I see this potentially as being a very high burst damage ability in PvP situations, especially in conjunction with our mastery, because it is a focus spending ability, and it does have range. If you're going a more ranged playstyle in PvP, I could see this really being a good option. We'll have to exactly see how it plays out, and if they are keeping it 100-yard range, I would be very, very surprised if that's accurate. But it's very cool to have an option in here that's basically a damage increase as far as a focus spending ability that is also ranged. So if you're going towards that range playstyle, like I've mentioned in these above talents, you have a lot of options there. Birds of Prey. Now, like I mentioned on Aspect of the Eagle, it is going to increase the range of your Raptor Strike or Mongoose Bite. Raptor Strike or Mongoose Bite, every time you cast that during the duration of Aspect of the Eagle, is going to extend the remaining duration by 1 second. So if it's a 20-second window now, how many times are you going to be able to cast Raptor Strike or Mongoose Bite in a 20-second window? I would argue 8 to 10 times pretty easily. So basically with this talent, you're going to increase the duration of that damage cooldown by 50%. Mathematically, it's going to be like roughly how it works out. Not to mention that if it's giving you a passive range increase on your Mongoose Bite or Raptor Strike, having higher uptime on that can be like exponentially more valuable, because you don't have to be in range to utilize that, since you have also so many other ranged options that basically the only way you're going to negate any of this burst coming from this cooldown is going to be if you get hard CC'd in PvP situations. So I actually really think this is going to have some cool uses depending on combinations of abilities you're going to go up here. Primal Instincts, Harpoon's going to give you a 15% crit increase for 12 seconds. Disengage is going to do the same, but for haste, these do not stack, do not refresh each other's durations, and you can only have one on at a time. I think this is actually going to be a better talent than it reads. It reads pretty anticlimactic when you look at it, but I think there's going to be ways of basically creating a playstyle where you harpoon in, you cast a handful of abilities, and then you disengage out, cast a handful of abilities, harpoon in, cast it in. I think you're going to be able to kind of rinse and repeat that process. And with that being said, I mean, I really think that there's a lot of cool options and ways you could basically use this. And if we're basically running like a high dot, you know, like damage over time type situation, that 15% haste could be pretty crucial as far as burst. I mean, it's basically like a mini bloodlust for 12 seconds. And with disengage is only a 20-second cooldown for survival. You know, so I'm really curious to see how that plays out. That could definitely create some very consistent pressure in a lot of PvP situations, really is what I'm thinking about. I don't see this being as helpful in PvE because I don't imagine you're going to be harpooning in and out and disengaging and going back and forth and back and forth. I could be wrong, though, but I see this being as more a PvP option and kind of a higher consistent uptime and higher consistent DPS, whereas this is going to be kind of a more, minute and a half, 2 minute cooldown type burst. Now let's get on here. Chakrams, the last talent, and let's wrap this up. 40-yard range, no resource cost, and has a 20-second cooldown. It does have a pretty high % damage on it. And the thing worth noting here is it's going to function basically like Glaive Toss, I believe is what it was called, that was implemented, I think, at the very beginning of Legion for Marksman. But it's basically going to shoot 2 glaives at a target, or some kind of whether it's 2 glaives or 1 glaive, I don't know. But it's basically going to boomerang back to you, and it's going to deal damage both ways. So the thing that I think is really cool and valuable to understand and think about with this is we have Butchery, which is a longer cooldown, higher burst AoE situation, and Chakrams, which costs no focus and is also kind of a high burst, longer cooldown type ability. When I'm saying longer cooldown, I'm saying compared to like throwing axes or kill command or something like that, not like a big burst cooldown. So I could see a lot of AoE burst potential between these two abilities, which is pretty exciting. So exactly how those synergize, I think, will be really cool because, you know, maybe you harpoon in, Butchery 3 times, disengage out, throw a Chakrams, and then like buff up or, you know, debuff all the targets and throw your dots. Could be pretty cool. Now, like I had mentioned, again, just to wrap this up, we can definitely still be running a very similar playstyle to currently how Survival plays. I am curious to run a situation where I basically would be running like throwing axes, probably Hydra's Bite here, be running Far Strider here, be running Bloodseeker here, be running Wyvern Sting as a range ability, running Arctic Bola, and then either Birds of Prey or Chakrams here, and basically having all of these ranged abilities, and then at certain times, like basically while, you know, if I'm running Birds of Prey while Aspect of the Eagle is on cooldown, you basically harpoon in, you know, and basically Raptor Strike to kind of, you know, keep up some damage in the downtime. But then when Aspect of the Eagle is up, you basically have just this high damage window coming from ranged. So I think that could be kind of a cool play style, and I'm really excited to test that out. Let me know what you guys think, if you guys have any additions or things that you've heard or read about the spec. But it's pretty cool so far from the tweaks and changes that they're at least mentioning at this point, and exactly how they fine-tune those closer to the release is going to be what we're looking out for here. So let me know what you guys think. Comment, rate, subscribe, ask any questions down below if you got it, and thanks so much. Have a good day, guys.